This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired. Which one? Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? It's another episode of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. As always, I am Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. And I had to bring in some help today. We finished up going over all the divisions last week, so I needed to bring in somebody to get some more perspective for fantasy football. So you may remember him from last year's shows. It is my brother, Joel Jarvi. We're in the lovely Grosse Pointe studio. We went on the road. How's it going, Joel?
It's going good, man. How are you?
It's going really good. How was your fantasy season last year?
You know, it was a weird fantasy season. I played in, I think, 3 leagues, and I made it to the championship in 1 and lost.
That was a work league, and you lost to your boss, right?
I did, yeah.
Did you take a dive in that one?
I absolutely did not take a dive in that one. I'm trying to play for the championship every single game. I don't care who I'm playing. But no, no championships last year. And like I said, it was a very, very weird fantasy season last year, I think. Lots of injuries, lots of just weirdness.
Yeah, a lot of the people that you could depend on, you really didn't get it from. Just quarterbacks alone. You look at the top 2 guys, Aaron Rodgers, Andrew Luck, neither of those guys performed anywhere near that they were expected.
Yeah, I had one of those seasons where I'd look at my team every week and I'd be like, what am I doing wrong? And I could never pinpoint one thing that was really wrong with my team. It was a tough one, and those are the kind of seasons you just got to kind of ride it out and hope luck changes, and there's not much you can do about it.
So are there any strategies that you are taking into this year that you're trying to tweak a little bit?
I don't know. I've got to do some more studying. Admittedly, I need to hit the books a little bit before draft. We got a little time here, but now is about the time of year that you need to start getting serious about it. So I'm doing that. I'm very interested in wide receivers this year.
You've been listening to the podcast, clearly.
But I think wide receivers are going to be where it's at. And the more I talk with people and the more information I get, the more it kind of makes sense to me. But it's hard for an old school fantasy player like me to say that I really want to load up on wide receiver. It's just against my nature.
Yeah, and that is one thing that I want to talk about with you is it's always been you go running back in the first round.
Always. I have that tattooed on my body.
And I think there's a change now. It's really going more towards wide receiver, that more times than not, you see more wide receivers outscoring the starting running backs. And a lot of times you have wide receivers who come out of nowhere, who just perform and just get the job done.
Absolutely. It's math, man. I mean, in the leagues where we end up starting 3 wide receivers, it's just math. That's how many, there's less of a talent pool because you need to start more players. So you need to start valuing them more. And not only that, you have to take into consideration old school fantasy players that it is a passing league now. It really is. It's a quarterback, wide receiver, tight end driven league. And if you don't have that quality on your team, it's going to be really hard for you to compete this year.
So are there any other draft strategies that you think would actually work? I mean, obviously, I think running back is almost the most dangerous draft style there is now because you're putting all of your stock into 2 running backs, where we've seen in the past couple of years that a number of the top 10 running backs, they always either end up getting hurt or they underperform. Look at Eddie Lacy, look at CJ Anderson, Monty Balls, all those kind of guys. They just don't perform. I might even think about a tight end. Take that Rob Gronkowski at the back end of the first round. I'm really high on Jordan Reed this year. Maybe going tight end and then getting one of the top wide receivers, or even going tight end quarterback and having the market on having the best tight end and the best quarterback.
Yeah, I could get behind any of those strategies, really. I think running back is going to be the hardest thing to justify if you did that this year. But I guess it also depends where you draft, how big your league is. I agree. I think I love late first round. I love Gronkowski. I've drafted him 2 years in a row. And the discrepancy of a Rob Gronkowski versus lesser tight ends is so big that it makes so much more sense to make that guy a first round pick. That being said, I did trade him last year.
And you shouldn't be afraid of trading Rob Gronkowski because you probably got a lot of value out of him, right?
I believe I got Tyler Eifert and a starting wide receiver.
Which Eifert had a pretty decent season last year. And if you need a starting wide receiver, he's a name who's going to pull, who's going to get you some prospects, really.
Agreed.
Running back. Obviously, if you're at the top part of the draft, you're looking at the Adrian Petersons, you're looking at Antonio Brown is probably the 1-2. But if some of those stud running backs fall to 5 and 6, I think you're almost handcuffed to take those guys, because if people are going the way of wide receivers and it's now a choice between the number 4 or 5 wide receiver like a Demaryius Thomas, maybe you're looking at Des Bryant at that point, or drafting Jamal Charles or David Johnson. I think it's a harder decision that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree totally. I think the later you pick in the first round, the more you are, I don't want to say it's idiot proof, but you do really have to take the best player that's there, regardless of position. You've got to look at who's going to give you the most bang for your buck. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. You need to hit like a solid hit on your first and second round picks if you want to be competitive in the league.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm the biggest proponent of that, because more often than not, I fail on my first or second round picks, and my season goes down the tubes. I think let's get into some NFL news and how it will pertain to you guys when you're drafting. And I think the biggest story, obviously, I've been talking about it really since we started up this second season of the podcast, is Tom Brady, and that he's been waiting for the Deflategate decision, and finally the decision came down, and he's suspended.
Cheater.
I was fully believing that he was going to somehow get off, and there's still the slim chance he could take it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is ridiculous because it's 4 games of a football game, where the Supreme Court I'm sure they have more important things to deal with. So Tom Brady is looking at a 4-game suspension, missing the first 4 games of this season, and it's going to hurt his draft stock. Last season he was one of the top 5 quarterbacks scoring wise, and it's definitely going to hurt him. Last week or a couple weeks when I was profiling the Patriots, I said it is that I think Tom Brady somewhere in the 5th or 6th round if he was playing the full season. But if he does get suspended, I think you have to draft him accordingly. And I think he gets knocked down probably somewhere in the middle of the draft. What do you think?
I'm excited. I think his suspension is going to add to a lot of intrigue in drafts, just in general, because Brady is he's such a linchpin to so many other players. What's it going to do to Deion Lewis? What's it going to do to Gronk? What's it going to do to Edelman? How is him being out those 4 games going to affect those guys' draft status too? Because let's face it, 4 games is a third of your fantasy season. That's a lot, man. And I don't know how soon you can really take him and count on him to be a starter for you. So what's going to happen, I think, at least, is I think you're going to see guys probably take him, like you said, middle of the draft, but they're not going to take him to start. They're going to take him as trade bait. So, man, week 4 with trading is going to be so fun, because you'll have guys out there that will have probably established starters at quarterback, and Brady's just going to be sitting there. And at that point, you could turn your season around making a trade for Brady.
Now, if you do take that middle round pick and you take Tom Brady, are you wanting to get one of those other top quarterbacks, so you're kind of stacked at quarterback, or are you getting one of those lower tier starting quarterbacks, maybe like a Matt Stafford, maybe a Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan's really he's a lot lower. But let's go with Matt Stafford, and then taking Tom Brady, and then taking another quarterback after that.
I don't know. So you're telling me you could roll out Stafford for the first 4 weeks of the season, and then at that point make a choice of whether or not you want to roll with Brady or you want to play the who's got the best matchup game. I don't know. That's really tough. I would love to be in that situation. When's New England's bye week?
I'm not sure, but I know I'm not sure, but what I will say is if you do go out and you on top of Tom Brady, if you draft another really high quarterback early, you may be setting yourself up to kind of shoot yourself in the foot, because guys will know that you have two really good quarterbacks, and if you're really looking to trade them, they know that you want to move them. So you're hurting yourself. So it may actually be better to look at a Matt Stafford or somebody even lower than that to be your fill-in for the first 4 games. And then once Tom Brady comes in, you make your choice. If the guy who's starting has turned it around, maybe it is like an Andy Dalton type player who he's hit or miss. So then you decide between Dalton or Tom Brady. And obviously, I think you'd get more from Tom Brady. And if you were in that kind of a situation with Dalton and Brady, I think you'd probably get more for Tom Brady.
Yeah, there's some sites out there that you can find online that can analyze. So what I would do in this situation, I think I would look at, if I knew ahead of time, I think you can't go into draft and be like, maybe I'll draft Tom Brady. If you're going to target Brady in the draft, I feel like you almost have to build your entire draft around that. And if that's the case, then you need to look at strength of schedule in those first 4 weeks and which quarterbacks you could really set yourself up for success. There's sites out there that'll do that you can set up parameters. You can set up who's got the easiest schedule for quarterbacks and go to town on it. That would be my suggestion. And then, like you said, I think that's what you do. You target a mid-tier quarterback, or maybe you do your homework. You find out that the Browns have like the easiest first 4 games, and you go RG3. Roll with them for 4 weeks, man. And at that point, you can be a little of a gambler at that point.
That is a true gamble. RG3 looking like garbage. I think you may actually be able to draft Brady and then draft RG3 if you're going that route.
Sure. No, that's what I think you should do if you're going after Brady. But find that guy. Though, and RG3 was just an example. But maybe it's a Tyrod Taylor. Maybe it's a guy that, a lesser name, and the guys in your draft are going to go, what is he doing? But you did your homework. You know the first 4 games better than anybody else. And that'll allow you to stock up on other positions at that point, get Brady mid-draft, and then get your starter for those first 4 weeks real late.
And that is the biggest thing. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, is doing your homework before the draft, targeting players, and especially if you are going to, if you want to target Brady, know when you want to take him. Have a round that this is the absolute earliest that I would ever take Tom Brady. That makes it easier for you, so you're not, in your draft and debating, do I take Brady or do I go for another position player?
Sure. Yeah, no, totally agree.
So along with Tom Brady, you have to also mention Jimmy Garoppolo, the backup in New England, who will be thrust into the starting role for the Patriots at least for the first 4 weeks. What does that do for his draft stock? Obviously, I think he has to shoot up. I'm not saying that he should be drafted before Tom Brady, but I think he's a very interesting player, especially if you're in a keeper league, because you look at the backup quarterback situation in New England before with Matt Castle, or even with Brian Hoyer. Both of those guys performed admirably, and then they got traded, and they were starters elsewhere. They weren't that successful, but Jimmy Garoppolo, if he comes in and does a pretty decent job, it's definitely, the Patriots love to trade away their players. So they could easily trade Jimmy Garoppolo away, and next season you'd have a starter for another season. But it all depends on where you draft him.
Well, let's be real too. How much more tread on the tires does Brady have? I mean, you're drafting Garoppolo.
Well, he thinks he can play until he's 45.
Well, I mean, if any organization has showed us that when a player is done, they're done, it's the Patriots. So as much as Brady's done for them, when he's done, he's done. And if they feel strongly that Garoppolo can perform up to Brady level or close to Brady level, I can see him being the starter there eventually. Not this year. Brady's still going to be a stud this year, and he's going to come back after Game 4, and he's going to just have a hate on for the whole league, and he's going to try to throw for at least 6 touchdowns every week.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd probably target Jimmy Garoppolo somewhere in the middle to late rounds. I'm not taking him before Brady, but because it's only going to be 4 weeks. Unless something really happens, something wrong happens, and Tom Brady isn't ready after 4 weeks, he's going to go back to holding the clipboard.
Yeah.
So some more news. Obviously today at 4 p.m. is the deadline for franchise players to sign extensions or to get any extensions really signed. And there's a couple notable players out there who aren't really looking to sign contracts. First one, Kirk Cousins. They're probably looking to put talks on hold. And I love players in their contracts here because that means they have something to play for. They're going to go out and do as best as they can possibly do to get that paycheck. And Kirk Cousins, he's, I think, right on the edge of beating a starting quarterback for fantasy football. And he's got an interesting team around him. What do you think this does for his value this year?
I like Cousins. I think he's going to have a good year. I think he's got definite top 20 potential, which isn't saying much, but I think high end, I think you could have him as a low top 10 quarterback realistically this year. Like you said, based on what he's got around him, based on the situation, based on the contract year, go get that money. Captain Kirk, we like that. Go get that money.
Yeah, you got to take off the green and white glasses. I do think that's and I know, I love my green and white glasses too. I'm a Sparty through and through. That situation, he has weapons, but I think it's also really precarious because you had Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, who you're never sure what you're going to get out of them. You have a rookie wide receiver in Josh Doxson, and then I love Jordan Reed, but the dude hasn't played 16 games in his entire career. So if one of those guys doesn't really pan out, and I think if Matt Jones doesn't come in and adequately replace Alfred Morris, it could be bad news for Kirk Cousins. And he may have, well, obviously he's getting paid this year because he's going to be playing under the franchise tag. But it'll hurt him next year.
Yeah, Matt Jones was a guy that was on my team last year that I thought his upside was so big, and I loved when he was on my team and performing. I can't say I legitimately started him ever where I got points out of him, but he was one of those guys where I felt really good about my depth for a long time until he then just fell off.
Yeah, he had fumbling issues,
yeah.
And Alfred Morris was still there. He's gone, and there really isn't a ton behind him. So it's his job to lose. Some other guys, Emmanuel Sanders in Denver, and he's a guy, he just always kind of performs. He's never really, when Peyton was Peyton initially for Denver Broncos, he was having some really good statistics. But what do you think Sanders can do? He's a brand new quarterback. We're not really sure who the quarterback is. Is it Sanchez? Is it Simeon? Is it Paxton Lynch? How is he? Do you think he can continue to put up numbers with a less than stellar quarterback?
Yeah, Denver is one of those, again, fascinating situations going into the season. Who is going to be the starter? That's why I really hope that people are drafting as close to the start of the regular season as possible, because then you'll have a better idea of who's going to be throwing the ball in Denver. Let's be real. I feel like whoever is throwing the ball is probably going to be pretty good. Peyton has not been Peyton the last few years. So I don't feel like the quality of play will be such a drop-off that these wide receivers won't be able to put up numbers. I don't know how I feel about Sanders, though. I feel like Sanders might be an odd man out sometimes. That's how I've always felt about him. I've been proved wrong before in the past, but I feel like there's a lot of talent there. I feel like with a rookie quarterback or with a new quarterback, you're going to see them lean on CJ Anderson more, who has shown that he can perform as well in the NFL. And then I don't know if there's enough balls to go around for Emmanuel Sanders, especially with a first-year quarterback.
Yeah, Demaryius Thomas, I'm not going to worry about him as much. But yeah, after that, it's really going to be a toss-up. It really depends on if they develop chemistry. And talking about chemistry, moving on to the Falcons, they went out and they got rid of Roddy White, and they brought in the Bengals wide receiver Mohamed Sanu to really take that second wide receiver spot. And I'm not completely thrilled about it because Julio Jones, I think he had like 200 targets last year. And then after him, it was Devontae Freeman. And then after him, it was Jacob Tamme. And then it was Roddy White. So I don't see Mohamed Sanu. He was a third wide receiver at best when he was in Cincinnati, behind A.J. Green and Marvin Jones. I'm not sure if he can really handle being that number 2 wide receiver. I'm not. And Matt Ryan is going to go to Julio Jones. And then he's going to dump it off to Devontae Freeman.
Yeah. So the Falcons, they got Mohamed Jones, and we got Marvin Sanu, right?
Or I think it's the other way around.
Oh, okay. So we got Mohamed Jones, and they got Marvin Sanu.
Something like that.
Okay, right. Bengals wide receivers, free agents, going to other teams. I feel like they're interchangeable. Atlanta's probably a decent situation. I like Matt Ryan, and he's one of those guys that there's always at one point of the season where he just has just a monster game, and I'm like, man, I wish I had him on my team. But he's always on Danny's team, and so I never worry about it too much. I don't know. I feel like Sanu could have a good season as well. I feel like he's got a better chance than maybe Emmanuel Sanders. I don't know. I mean, you look at
that's some bold words. That might be a bold prediction for the King's Decree.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I feel like Devonta Freeman is going to fool a lot of people. He fell off hard last year.
He was still pretty good.
Yeah, but he was so good at the beginning of the season. I don't know. The Falcons, they're such a question mark. They're one of those teams that a lot of times I just stay away from. I mean, I've said before on these podcasts that what I look for the most is locks. Man, I don't want to go out. I don't want to have to make decisions every week. If I have to pick between a guy that I think is a lock and a guy that's a question mark, but may have a huge upside, I'm going to go with the lock every time. It's just easier, and at the end of the night, I sleep better.
So, a running back situation that is pretty murky, or at least has had some issues over the offseason, is the Buffalo Bills. LaShawn McCoy dealt with his issue at a nightclub. He isn't facing any charges. Carlos Williams comes into minicamp, well overweight, looking like a Dunkin' Donut. And now rookie running back Jonathan Williams was just arrested for a suspected DWI. Obviously, I think LaShawn McCoy, he's going to lock that position up. Does Jonathan Williams even register for you? Or is it really LaShawn McCoy? And do you think Carlos Williams will come back from it? Will he lose the baby weight?
I think that's hard. That's a tough question. And I feel like guys that are coming in overweight and not preparing for the season like they need to.
But he was eating with his pregnant wife.
Well, still, more often than not, those guys are trouble. And you don't want that trouble and that question mark on your team. LaShawn McCoy's solid. He's a good running back. I don't feel like he got used like he probably should have last year. So maybe this is the year for LaShawn. Like, he needed a year in that offense, and maybe this will be the year that he can, crack top 10 and be a stud.
I like LaShawn McCoy. I mean, I always have, and I think people needed a year of him away from the Eagles to see what he could really do. And I still think he was good last year, and I do hope. I hope he comes back this year and becomes the fantasy stud that he always was. And to wrap up the news, Thomas Rawls, the new starting running back for the Seattle Seahawks, no more beast mode. I know you're sad about that. I know Danny's sad about that because he always take Marshawn Lynch.
Him or me.
But the Thomas Rawls is saying that he's expecting to be full go for the beginning of training camp, which it was kind of a question mark leading up, going all the way through the off-season workouts. And now he's saying that he's ready to go. I don't think he's been completely cleared, but I think that's him saying that he hasn't really had any setbacks. and that he's going to be ready to go for the season. And I know I like Thomas Rawls. I had him last year on my team before he got hurt, and I definitely like what he brings to the table. But I think that offense might be transitioning to more of a passing team with the Russell Wilson going berserky last year, throwing all those touchdowns to Doug Baldwin.
Yeah, I mean, how many games does Thomas Rawls have in his NFL career? 5 games? He played his college ball where?
Central Michigan, I think.
Central Michigan. I mean, do you really trust a guy talking about his NFL prospects coming into a year like that? I mean, if there was anywhere that a running back would succeed, it would be Seattle. And you would think that, taking over the mantle from Beast Mode would be, a no-brainer. But I think we've seen guys like Robert Turbin and Christian Michael. Like, these are guys that were supposed to do this too, and they didn't. So I guess Thomas Rawls is one of those guys that I guess I want to see it. Like, I feel like I agree. I like him too. I feel like he's got a lot of physical abilities and a lot of the, profile to be successful there. I want to see it first, unfortunately, with him. So I'm probably going to be out on that guy. And I agree too. Russell Wilson he's got a better arm than I think most of the NFL gives him credit for. And he has
a ton of targets there.
He does.
He's got Doug Baldwin. He's got Jermaine Kearse. He has Tyler Lockett, who's emerging as a better option as a wide receiver. And they have Jimmy Graham.
Oh, yeah, that guy. I remember that guy.
And I think they really started using him the way that he should be before he got hurt last year. So I think Russell Wilson has the possibility of really having a great season this year.
Sure.
And I think there are some other running backs on that team who are sleepers, and that's what we're going to get into next. Sleepers and busts, but we're going to take a quick break. We'll have sleepers and busts. We'll have the King's Decree when we come back. You're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerds. Again, with me this week is my brother, Joel Jarvi. I have my nickname from my Twitter handle, Jarvi the King. Has there ever been a nickname for you?
No, I've never had a nickname. I'm sorry, it's super boring.
It's Joel.
It's just Joel. People with like one syllable names don't get nicknames, it's just Joel. It's easy to say and it's one syllable, and I've just never really had a nickname like Cheese or...
I remember at one point, didn't you have a shirt that said Buddha on it?
Possibly.
I thought there was Buddha, I thought there was Biggie.
Maybe.
No. None of it stuck?
No, nothing sticks, man. You gotta have... do you know anybody that you call by a nickname that legitimately sticks and, he goes by it?
There's not a lot. I think the most common is a play off the last name. It's Jarvi or Jarv.
Yeah.
I know at the radio station, Lindsey Hunter, he used to name drop. He used to always call me Jarv.
Yeah. Well, what about Tom Mazaway?
Yeah, Maz. Anybody with the last name Wojciechowski is automatically Woj or Wojo. So last names are always the easiest. I kind of fell into the King. But yeah, no nickname for you, but that's okay. And we're gonna get into sleepers and busts now. It's a hot topic because sleepers, you want to find that guy who's the diamond in the rough, who you can find late in the draft, and you want to avoid the busts because if you miss on any of your top couple picks, it's really going to put you behind the 8 ball in your fantasy season. So we got some sleepers and busts for quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. We'll start out with quarterbacks. For sleepers, no big surprise. I kind of putting on my Honolulu blue and silver glasses. Matt Stafford.
Is he a sleeper? Is he a sleeper?
I think
when a guy has a 5,000-yard career,
I think he's a sleeper based on where his average draft position is and what he's going to produce. Because more often than not, Stafford is like he's drafted like the 10th or 12th quarterback overall. Maybe after the 5,000-yard years, I think he was drafted a little bit higher. But I think he's kind of gone down a little bit. I think people are discounting him a little bit this year with no Megatron. But I think he still has the possibility to do good. I really believe, it was a telling thing when he said that when somebody asked him, what's life going to be like without Calvin Johnson? And he said that we're actually going to be able to look at tape on defenses, and we're actually going to see that on game day. Because when, they can look at defensive tape all they want, but they're always going to put 2 or 3 guys on Calvin Johnson. I think he's going to be looking at a lot more single coverage or just normal packages for defense. And I think that could be a really good thing. And obviously, there are a lot of dominoes that have to fall for him to be really good. It's going to be Golden Tate and Marvin Jones. But if guys like Eric Ebron and TJ Jones and Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick if they can be clicking on all cylinders under the Jim Bob Cooter offense, I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I'm gonna present this statement in a vacuum, and you take it however you want to take it, right? So Stafford's played with Calvin his whole career. We always hear about how Calvin gets 2 guys, 3 guys covering him every game, right? So that means then that if there are 2 or 3 players covering Calvin, don't there have to be at least 1 wide receiver or 1 tight end or 1 running back running completely free on every single play?
Oh, you'd like to think so, but obviously with zones, I think there's multiple people covering, other players. But his main target would be Calvin, and then he suffers when guys like Eric Ebron drop the ball.
I agree, and I feel like, again, I love Stafford, but I've become a Stafford realist, and I accept him for who he is and what he is, and most importantly, what he is not. And what he is not is a very accurate passer. It is what it is. And Stafford will be as good as the people around him this year. He's not going to lift people up, but he will be as good as everybody else around him. Which I think, like when you hear people talk about Calvin leaving, which, yes, he's a fantastic wide receiver and probably one of the greatest we'll see in Detroit in our time. And we will miss him, and you can't lose a guy like that, blah, 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 blah. Like, everybody has said all that stuff. But every time I hear people talk, they always say, well, you can't replace him with Marvin Jones and Eric Ebron. And it feels like nobody remembers that we have Golden Tate on the team. When Calvin was out and Golden was there and Stafford actually looked his way, Golden was a very good number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, he had his best statistical season. He had over 1,000 yards. I think he had like 12 touchdowns or something like that.
Yeah, in Golden, I trust. And I feel like Stafford will have a top 15 year this year, which again is not going him out on much of a limb. But he's a top 15 and could easily break top 10. Easily.
Right. So I think there's a couple more sleepers on this, and they're actual more sleepers. Marcus Mariota from Tennessee. I think he had a promising beginning of his rookie season. Obviously, he dealt with the injury, but I think the team has gotten better. They have a dearth of running backs. I've talked about it on this podcast. It's almost frustrating how many running backs they have on that team that could be starters on any other team. DeMarco Murray, Derrick Henry, Antonio Andrews, David Cobb. But I think another year with Dorial Green Beckham. They still have Justin Hunter is a adequate wide receiver when he's healthy. And Delaney Walker, I think, is also a really good pass-catching tight end, and he showed that last year. If Mariota can stay healthy, I think he could be an interesting option, and that's why I kind of think that he's one of those sleepers. He might be a little bit deeper of a sleeper.
I mean, he doesn't have the speed of Russell Wilson, but not many quarterbacks do. I feel like Mariota has that X factor when you're looking at a fantasy quarterback. He's like your bonus guy, man. He's the guy that could on the 3-yard line call his own number and all of a sudden he sneaks it in. Whereas you got other guys that that's never ever going to happen. So that's always tantalizing for your starting fantasy quarterback to get those extra yards, with his legs. I like Mariota. I think that's a good sleeper pick. I think you could get him for a value.
I mean, I'm not sure if this guy's a sleeper. I think he's probably still drafted like this. Blake Bortles. I think he kind of had his coming out party last year. He has really good weapons. Can he put it together with on that Jaguars team? Now, I really like him. I'm not sure if I want to draft him as my starting quarterback just yet, but he's somebody that if I were to get one of those lower tier starting quarterbacks, I would love to get Blake Bortles and be able to play that matchup game.
For sure. I mean, you've got Allen Robinson. You've got
Allen Hurns. You've got TJ Yeldon, which is I love that combination of having an aerial attack and then having just an outright bruiser at running back. Well, they have TJ Yeldon, and then they also went and signed Chris Ivory.
Yeah, and
so they have a two-headed monster.
They also have super sleepy Denard Robinson.
I think he's still sitting in a lake somewhere.
Yeah, his car is slowly sinking. Denard, get out of the car, Denard.
Is it because his shoelaces were untied?
I don't know.
But I like Bortles this year. Is it too crazy to say that Tom Brady's a sleeper? He's going to miss 4 games, and I still think he has the ability to come out and be the top scoring quarterback in fantasy.
Wow. So you're saying in 8 games he could top a Russell Wilson playing 12 games of your fantasy season?
You never know.
If anybody could do it, it'd be Brady.
He's really going to come out, and I think you said it. He's going to hate everybody.
Oh, man.
And he's just going to want to score. I think it could be really dangerous. Guys who have Rob Gronkowski, when they just they can get down to the red zone. They have LeGarrette Blount. They have Deion Lewis. They can pound it down there, and then he's just going to get like a ton of 2-yard touchdown passes to Rob Gronkowski. And then they also have Martellus Bennett. Yep. I think he's kind of being forgotten that they picked him up this year. They finally have a true 2 tight end system. They could be really dangerous. But is he a sleeper?
I don't know that you could ever say Tom Brady's a sleeper. Ever. I mean, for it to be we'll define a sleeper, right? A sleeper is a guy that you either had a good feeling about going into the season and nobody else did. I don't know. I don't know that he's a sleeper, but I think it's a bold prediction. I don't know if it's a king's decree, but it's a bold prediction.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on the limb and say that he will be that, but I think it's possible. And I think if you go based strictly on a sleeper as he's going to perform higher than what his draft position says it is, then I think he could be labeled a sleeper.
Sure, yeah.
Now, moving on to the bust for the quarterbacks, I think it's easier. And I think there are quarterbacks who are, I think if you're a sleeper, you're almost automatically always a bust. You're a possibility for a bust as well. And I put Blake Bortles in the possible bust scenario as well, because Allen Robinson, obviously he's a stud. Allen Hurns, he got his money. Mm-hmm. And that's, as much as I love guys who are in the contracts years, I immediately hate guys who went out and got their money. And he got it before the year. I'm not saying that he's going to go out there and not perform, but he's got his guaranteed money already. So I think that's the one downside I have for Blake Bortles. I think he probably is more. He's going to be a better quarterback, but I think there's still that slim possibility.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would agree again. I think you're absolutely right, man. There are 2 sides. Sleepers and busts are 2 sides of the same coin. And for every reason that we could say that Bortles is going to blow up, we can absolutely say that Bortles is going to suck it up. He plays in Jacksonville still. They have to play good teams. Everybody has to play everybody in the league.
Mm-hmm. And I think another guy who, and we talked about him a little bit earlier, he doesn't have his contract yet, but who I think could easily be a bust is Kirk Cousins.
Sure.
He already had a shot the year before last when he supplanted RG3, but then he he threw a bunch of picks, and then he got supplanted by Colt McCoy, I think, at one point. So I think it's really possible, and I think that's what the Washington Redskins are kind of banking on, that Kirk Cousins he kind of dials it back a little bit, that he doesn't go out and throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns. Yeah. Because then you gotta back up the Brinks truck. I think there's a lot of weapons there, but I think there's a lot of question marks. Like I said, with Matt Jones, with the running game, and then some other quarterbacks who I think are the possibilities for busts, based solely on where they're being looked at for draft. Andrew Luck and Cam Newton. So Andrew Luck, I would say, because he's coming off of a horrible year last year, and people are pretty much thinking that he's going to have a bounce back year. I'm not sure of the offense that they have. I like Frank Gore. But he's another year older. T.Y. Hilton always scares me because he's a boomer bust player. Yep. And then who else do they have? And for Cam Newton, I think he had just a ridiculous statistical season, and he really got helped out at the end of the year. He had a couple 5-touchdown games. I don't see him scoring nearly as many passing or rushing touchdowns. And what do you think about those two guys?
So, I'm seeing Cam as high as 1 for quarterbacks this year. So, to say that he's a bust, or he could potentially be a bust, what's a bust? If he ends up the 9th best quarterback and you drafted him as the first quarterback overall, is it a bust? Probably, because
that's completely a bust.
You're drafting him to be a stud and just to score a ton of points for you. I feel like between the two, Cam has the most chance of duplicating what he did last year, especially with the fact that you got Devin Funchess, who has another season under his belt.
Devin Funchess.
He did all those stats, though, with nothing around him. And so where I sit here and I say that Stafford is a quarterback that will not make the people around him better, Cam, I feel like potentially could be a quarterback that makes others around him better. He's going to also don't forget Kelvin Benjamin back, too. That dude is a stud and a beast, and we have never seen him operate on the highest level.
Yeah, he really did make wide receivers last year. Ted Ginn was irrelevant, and
the corpse of Ted Ginn. Yeah.
He had some really good games. I think you even look at a Corey Brown. He made those players. Obviously, Greg Olsen was probably the biggest benefactor of Kelvin Benjamin not being there. But it will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Let me ask you before we move on. So I'm looking at Sporting News' ranks for quarterbacks, and if we're talking about busts, you tell me what you think about this. 5th overall quarterback, Jameis Winston.
I said on a previous episode in the King's Decree that I think Jameis Winston has the ability to be a top 8 quarterback.
Wow, okay.
Because I think he has the ability. I think as much as we've seen him be moronic outside of football, I really think he's a smart football player. Mm-hmm. And I think he can do it. He started off slow last year, but really started picking up speed. And Mike Evans is a stud wide receiver. I still think Vincent Jackson has some fuel in the tank. The resurgence of Doug Martin, if Austin Seferian-Jenkins can stay healthy, I wouldn't draft him as the number 5 quarterback overall, but I would feel comfortable drafting him probably in the lower tier of starting quarterbacks.
Okay.
Obviously with Jameis Winston, though, I would want to make sure that I had a decent backup quarterback, just in case I am completely wrong. But I'm going to bank on that I'm not wrong. So moving on to running backs, got a couple sleepers, and I think because of recent happenings, I think Duke Johnson becomes a gigantic sleeper for running back. Isaiah Crowell, after the tragedy that happened last week in New Orleans and Minnesota, tweeted out a horrible image, and he's getting a ton of backlash. Cleveland police were threatening to pull their guys from the Browns stadium. He's going on an apology tour, but and we haven't really seen the Browns, though, actually punish him. And I think if we see Tom Brady gets suspended 4 games for
Cheating.
Slightly deflating the ball.
Cheating.
I think it's nowhere out of the realm. I think Crowell could be facing some sort of suspension. And I think that could be good for Duke Johnson.
Yeah, so I've been riding, what has it been, 2 years now? I've been kind of riding the West Crowell train a little bit and probably overvaluing them a little bit as well. But every year it seems like I've been able to identify the right guy, and they've been pretty solid for me. That being said, I what he tweeted out was horrible, and I feel like this is one of those things that's just going to go away. It will just go away. I don't think he's going to get suspended. The fact that the Browns still haven't done anything, I don't think anything's going to happen. The fact that the police are threatening not to cover the Browns games, I feel like that's an empty threat anyway. It's the NFL. The NFL is king. And I mean, it's one thing them walking out of a WNBA game in Minnesota. It's another thing with the NFL and the Browns. And also, nobody goes to Browns games anyway, so they don't really need police protection, quite honestly.
Well, their team is so bad, you might need police protection, though.
Well, that's true. But that being said, I do like Duke Johnson, and I would love to see him have a great season. Again, anytime you're in a situation where you can be the guy, and I don't have to have a question mark by you, I don't have to play the Crowell or West game, which obviously we don't have to play the West game anymore because he's gone. But if I don't got to play that game, and all I know it's the Duke Johnson show, I'm on board for that.
And, I think Duke Johnson has more value in PPR leagues because he is, even if he's not the starting running back, I think he's really the third down back. He's the pass-catching threat out of the backfield, and he's going to get you more numbers. And you should draft him accordingly in PPR leagues. But in standard leagues, I definitely think he's a sleeper. He may be even a deeper sleeper. Another guy who's looking really good coming into mini camps and off-season workouts, Melvin Gordon. He was completely talked up. He was even being talked about being the best rookie running back last year, better than Todd Gurley. We all know that's wrong, but they're saying that he was hurt pretty much the entire season last year and that he has a better grasp of the offense. Can Melvin Gordon can you trust him as a starting running back in fantasy football?
You can, absolutely. I think that you're looking at him playing in an offense that is historically good. You're looking at, is Woodhead still in San Diego?
He is still there.
See, I guess that's one of the things then that always works against you, because Danny Woodhead is one of those guys that will get touches when he probably shouldn't. He's the guy that it's going to drive you crazy, that you're going to have Melvin Gordon starting for you on a Monday night, and you're going to need 10 points out of the guy, and he's going to drive for 30 yards in a drive, get down to the 3-yard line, and then Danny Woodhead is going to catch a 3-yard pass. That is going to happen to you this season if you are a Melvin Gordon owner. I promise you that. That being said, I hate when you find out after the fact that, he was injured all season long. Like, that drives you crazy, because if all ahead of the season, everyone's talking about how he might be the best rookie running back and all that, and then, just kidding, he was hurt all season long. Like, as a fantasy player, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, and it kills you. It's the lower body injury syndrome. Another guy who I think is a really, really deep sleeper, and I've talked him up over the podcast. I love him. CJ Prosise, the rookie running back from Seattle. And I see you with your eyebrows. Do you like you some CJ Prosise?
I do like myself some CJ Prosise. Talk about a guy who was thrown into a situation last year, a difficult situation at Notre Dame, and coming in and performing at a very, very high level against a lot of really, really good teams. CJ Prosise, when I heard he went to Seattle, I thought that was an amazing place for him to go. I think if he's going to be successful, that's such a great place for him to go. So I like that guy a lot. I like a deep sleeper. That's a good one, Jason. I like him.
And I like him. I think you'll be able to get him in the middle to later part of drafts. I know myself, I might reach a little bit higher. And if you're listening to this podcast, and if you are in a league with me, you're going to have to reach a little bit higher to get CJ Prosise. I'm looking at you, Joel.
Great.
I like what he can do. I've said before, I see them using him kind of how they used Percy Harvin, where Percy Harvin was a weapon. And you saw the year that they won the Super Bowl that when he came in for those playoff games, he was a difference maker. Yep. And, out of, end arounds. And I think that's another thing that helps EJ Procise is that he can line up in the backfield, and then he can also line up in the slot. He's similar to what Theo Riddick can do for the Detroit Lions. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to see him do that. Or maybe even supplant Thomas Rawls as the starter at some point this season. Because Rawls obviously coming off of the injury. And Pete Carroll he started a rookie before, and it worked out pretty well for him.
Yeah, I think too, if I'm not mistaken, that comparison to Percy Harvin, I believe CJ Procise is a converted wide receiver. He was a wide receiver at Notre Dame and then moved to running back when they had a need for it. And so let's be honest too, like anytime you're looking at, and this is probably a bad bias to have, but anytime you're looking at rookies that are coming in and that they played at big name schools like Alabama and Florida State and Oregon and Notre Dame, that these kids are playing the closest thing to pro ball that you can get. So a guy like Procise, I feel like, is way ahead of the pack.
Right, and you talked about Thomas Rawls playing his college ball at Central Michigan. I think CJ Procise, playing in Notre Dame, I think he's almost at probably a similar place where Thomas Rawls is.
Agreed.
So I think you got to take that into factor when you're drafting that guy this year. A running back who I think falls into that sleeper bust mode, Matt Jones on the Washington Redskins. I think if he can fix his fumbling problem, I think the sky's the limit for the guy. He's a bruiser. He does have a little bit of speed, and I think that's what the Redskins have really been dying for. They haven't really had that bruising running back since Clinton Portis was there.
Sure. Steven Davis even.
Yeah, Steven Davis. So it's really going to hinge on what Matt Jones can do, and I think it's really going to that offense is going to depend on him. I think you got a couple. There's a couple more busts that I have here. Unfortunately, I love my Sparties, but I got to put Jeremy Langford in this bust category. I hate the Bears.
That's fair.
I know people they're getting excited about them for whatever reason. They think Jay Cutler is going to be a better quarterback than people have been saying that he's going to be better. And I was when I was trying to do my King's Decree today, I was looking at I looked at Jay Cutler. I'm like, can I argue for him having a good season? And I just can't. There's no way that I could argue for him. And I think that's one of the biggest things with Jeremy Langford. It's going to hurt him. He's looking to fill the role that Matt Forte did, and Matt Forte was a huge catching threat out of the backfield. I know he can kind of handle that, but I don't think he's nowhere near as good as Matt Forte.
No, I mean Matt Forte is he's going to be historically a great running back, and so you can't have that guy leave and not have somewhat of a drop off. I like Jeremy Langford. That being said, I like Langford a lot. I think he played big time college games at Michigan State, which again, like you can't put Michigan State up with the Alabamas and the Oregons of the world yet, but he played big time games there, and I feel like he's got everything in him that he could, if not fill in the shoes adequately of Matt Forte. I think he might be a tougher, through the middle runner than Forte ever was.
Yeah, I'd agree. So it's going to really rely on what the Bears' offensive line then can do.
Yeah.
If they can't really protect Cutler, can they open up holes for Jeremy Langford?
Yeah. Is Cutler going to have someone to throw to help open up holes?
And I think he does. I think Alshon Jeffrey, I think he's in a similar situation where he doesn't have an extension, so he's going to be playing for a contract. And then you got the Kevin White, who I do have him as a sleeper, just because he's really an unknown, but he was a first-round draft pick for a reason. Yeah. It's going to depend on really what the offensive line can do for Jeremy Langford. One other bust at running back who I said it in a King's Decree in an episode before, David Johnson. I have to put him as a bust. I've seen him as high as number 2 for running backs.
No way.
I can't do that. David Johnson, he didn't. It's not like he came out last year and had 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns.
You saw him as high as 2?
Yeah, and ESPN has him ranked as like the 2nd or 3rd best running back.
Come on.
And I think it's craziness because you also have Ezekiel Elliott up there in the top 5 as well. But David Johnson, there's groups of weapons that I hate. Like, I don't like anybody on the Browns. 49ers, I generally shy away from those guys. And Arizona running backs. Arizona running backs always kill you.
Yep.
Andre Ellington, Chris Johnson, and they just haven't had a stable running back there. And obviously if you're arguing for David Johnson, you would be saying that he is the answer. But I just don't see it. I don't see, he's got speed, and I think he's a good pass-catching threat. I haven't seen him being that dominant running back, though.
Yeah. I think we could very easily right now play the game of, would you take David Johnson or would you take this guy? And chances are, we're going to go through a few running backs before you get to David Johnson being your choice.
I would put him probably 7 or 8. I think there's a lot of there's other guys that I'd rather have over him who I would feel more comfortable. I'd go as far to say that I'd feel more comfortable drafting Ezekiel Elliott because I think he's a better prospect and he's running behind the best offensive line in the NFL.
Yep, agreed. Let me throw out one name to you real quick here. The 31st ranked running back by Sporting News this year, Jonathan Stewart. Don't you feel like that's really, really low?
It is very low. And I think that's somebody who probably... He thinks that the Panthers are really going to regress this season. He probably thinks Cam Newton is going to have... He's not going to have the season that he had last year. But Jonathan Stewart, I think everything has to be working on that offense to be like a top 10 running back. But 30 is really low. I think he's a number 2 running back for
sure.
Fantasy. To have him ranked 30th is having him just as depth. If it was my team, I would love it if I have 2 other guys who are better than him and have him be my backup running back. But Jonathan Stewart is more than likely somewhere in that, anywhere between 15 and 25. That's where I would accurately rank him.
Yeah, I feel like he might actually be closer to like the 15th, 16th, 17th. Honestly, I feel like 30 is absurd. That's way too low.
I think though some of the reason why he may be so low is because running backs come and go. And you never know. He's another year older. He has dealt with injuries in the past. I think he only missed maybe a game or 2 last season. But can he stay healthy that entire time? Or maybe they try and conserve him. I think that was one thing that I noticed watching the Panthers games last year, late in the season, when he was hurting, is they were struggling. They don't really have a running back behind Jonathan Stewart. So I think they may try and limit his touches so that he can make it through an entire season. Because if they want to make another deep playoff run this year, Jonathan Stewart is going to be important. He's their best running back they got. He can
after Cam Newton.
Yes, but then I don't think Cam Newton is going to have the rushing season that he had last year either.
I love fantasy.
So moving on to wide receivers, sleepers. I already mentioned Kevin White, but moving on to another guy who is. Is it easier to say rookie wide receivers are going to be sleepers?
Man, I love rookie wide receivers.
They have so much promise, but they also have some of the most difficult times finding that. You're not always going to get an Odell Beckham Jr. But
do you remember how much you loved Nelson Aguilar?
I loved it. He let me down so hard. He did get cleared from his charges, and he's going to be in camp, but I just have no faith in him this year.
Yeah.
But another rookie wide receiver who also happens to be on the Giants, Sterling Shepard. There's a lot of talk on him. I think he's going really low, but but he has the possibility to almost immediately come in and be the number 2 option because number 1, obviously OBJ, but after him, Victor Cruz, is he going to come back completely healthy? And if he doesn't, then it's going to be Sterling Shepard, and he's not the fastest wide receiver, but he's known for being a really good route runner, which could be good for a quarterback like Eli Manning, who needs a dependable wide receiver.
Yeah, there's always at least one game of the season where Ruben Randall just explodes, and I always wonder why didn't I pick that guy up on the free agency, wire? And I think maybe Sterling Shepard could easily be that guy this year.
Yeah, and because Ruben Randall is going back to irrelevancy in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Another guy that I like, and he's prospering from Martavis Bryant's love for marijuana, and it's Sammy Coates. You have in Pittsburgh, you got Antonio Brown. He's, I think last year people thought that he was going to drop off, and he didn't. Ben Roethlisberger loves Antonio Brown. He's going to force him the ball whenever he can. And then I don't think Marcus Wheaton really stepped up, and I'm not sure if he can claim that number 2 position for wide receiver. And after him, then it's going to be Sammy Coates.
Yeah, I loved Martavis Bryant last year. He was like, I had hearts in my eyes for Martavis Bryant, and I really wanted him to do really good. And he never quite lived up to that potential last year, and now he's gone for this year.
Yep.
I think that's so disappointing. So yeah, Sammy Coates, that could be huge. Let me throw out a name to you, Jason, and you tell me what you think again. Another ND guy, Will Fuller in Houston.
Will Fuller in Houston, it's interesting. I like Will Fuller, but DeAndre Hopkins is going to be the main target there.
Do you feel like DeAndre Hopkins is the real deal? You think that because I feel like he's a faker.
I feel the same way right now about DeAndre Hopkins. That I think he's going to be kind of like Antonio Brown, where people are going to doubt what he did, and he's going to come back and he's going to have another good year. Who did he do all that with last year, throwing him the ball?
A tin can.
So now, it's yet to be seen if Brock Osweiler can be the guy, but he's a better option than what he had last year. I think he's gonna have a good season again. But after Hopkins, I think you have Will Fuller. They still have Jalen Strong. They've drafted a ton of wide receivers, and I love Braxton Miller, who I like him similar to like what CJ Prosise could be in Seattle. I think they have Braxton Miller. You can line him up in the backfield. You can line him up in the slot, and I think Braxton Miller he has the possibility of having a better season than Will Fuller because he's just going to be using his athleticism to really produce, where Will Fuller is he's going to be the deep threat. He's going to be the guy that they say, run a streak, and hopefully Osweiler can get you the ball.
Yeah, Fuller's got great hands, though. He could catch anything that was just at his direction. So I definitely like Fuller. That'll be fun to watch. Fuller, Braxton Miller, see who kind of comes out on top. I guess at the end of the day, it then comes down to, are you an Irish or are you a Buckeye?
Yeah. And I don't like either of those teams. But if I'm going strictly on talent, I like what I see from Braxton Miller. I like those weapon players.
Huge X factor.
But I think both of them could have good seasons. And another rookie wide receiver, also from Ohio State, in a great passing offense. I've talked about him before. Michael Thomas. There's no more Marcus Colston there. After Brandon Cooks, and you can't deny that they went out and signed Coby Fleener. And I've also said on this podcast, I think Coby Fleener could have a really, really good season this year. But I think Michael Thomas kind of steps in and he fills that Marcus Colston role of being a dependable receiver in the red zone.
What then happens to Brandon Cooks?
I think Brandon Cooks he's similar to T.Y. Hilton. He's going to beat you on long routes. I think he's a little bit better than a boomer bust player. Like Deshaun Jackson, he's a boomer bust player. He's going to get 3 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown.
Or he's going to get completely shut out and not catch a ball.
Yeah, or fumble the ball at the goal line because he's celebrating. Brandon Cooks, I think he has a little bit. He's a little bit more of a possession receiver, but he also has that deep threat possibility. So I think he's the guy who you send out, but he can be a number one wide receiver. And Michael Thomas, I think, he's going to be that second option.
Yeah. So when does Drew Brees? I guess my question is as we were sitting here and talking about sleepers and busts, I'm looking at quarterbacks and I'm thinking about who I think's going to, be my boom or bust. And I see Brees, and I'm this close to saying that he's going to be the bust for me this year. But I don't know. He keeps defying the odds. Like, he started off so slow last year, and then man, he's so good to end the year.
Until Drew Brees completely drops off the face of the earth, I can never count him out. Yeah. He's been so dependable, and I tried to argue against it, but looking at his stats, it's just ridiculous.
You can't.
He's so small, and he's getting so much older, but he's still performing.
He's so smart.
It's going to happen at some point, but I don't think it's this season yet. I still think he has another season. Back to wide receivers, though, looking at the busts. Like I said earlier with the Jaguars, Allen Hurns, I think he got his money, and he's going to be the number 2 guy. And you never know if that offense will truly succeed, but he's going to disappear for games. I think you've had Allen Hurns at some point, and you've gone back and forth. Do I start this guy, or is he going to give you nothing?
Yep. Yeah, no, I've had Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson. I call them the Allens.
Yep.
And I've had them both. Allen Robinson, I'm proud to say that I've been on the Allen Robinson bandwagon, I feel like, a lot longer than everybody else. And he's kind of been one of those guys that's proved me right. And I really like having him on my team. He's just a steady... Again, he's one of those guys that I know I'm just going to start. I'm not going to worry about the matchup. I'm not going to worry about who Jacksonville plays that week. I'm just going to put him in my lineup, and I'm going to win or lose on that guy's back.
And you can do that for Allen Robinson, but I don't think you can say that for Allen Hurns.
No way.
Because Allen Hurns, I think, it's a crapshoot if he's going to have a really, really good game or if he's going to completely disappear.
Agreed.
Another guy who's like that, we already mentioned him, Deshaun Jackson.
Yep.
Boom or bust completely. And then 2 guys that I think are going to suffer from poor quarterback play, at least in the early parts of the season, Julian Edelman and Eric Decker. Mm-hmm. Julian Edelman... I'm not sure what Jimmy Garoppolo is going to do yet, but it's definitely I think he's going to rely on Rob Gronkowski a lot. And can Julian Edelman ever stay healthy for an entire year?
I don't know. I mean, I think the question really you have to ask is, have you seen any pictures of Jimmy Garoppolo and Julian Edelman wearing skimmer hats together at all in the offseason?
And I don't think Julian Edelman has ever made a GIF or a meme with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, that's a red flag for me.
So, I mean, and then Eric Decker, obviously with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, do you think Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to get a deal done with the Jets, or are they really going to trot out Geno Smith?
I think that there's a very good chance they could trot out Geno Smith. I mean, anytime you take a guy as high as they did with Geno Smith, he's got a long, long leash.
It's so bad. It sucks for Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, both of those guys. I feel like both of them were almost irrelevant last year, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, breathed life into them, and now they're almost going to go back to irrelevancy. Geno Smith, Bryce Petty, Christian Hackenberg, none of those guys I'm confident that could get them the ball consistently. So I think Brandon Marshall will still put up numbers. I think he'll probably, with Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think Marshall is more of a wide receiver 1. Mm-hmm. But with Geno Smith or whoever else, I think he drops down to a wide receiver 2 immediately.
For sure.
And Eric Decker, he almost more just depth for your team. I wouldn't want to have to rely on him to start in any fantasy game.
Yep. No, I agree with you. 100%.
Do you have any wide receiver busts for me?
I don't know about busts. No, again, wide receiver is such a, high upside, rainbows in the sky type position. Like, all you can ever see is, the greatness that could be with all these wide receivers. So, It's hard for me to target just one.
All right, so we're just about done with the podcast, but it's about that time where I give you my King's Decree.
I can't wait.
So my King's Decree this week is in the top 15 quarterbacks this year. It's going to include all 4 quarterbacks from the NFC South. So Cam Newton, Drew Brees, both of those are easy candidates for this. Even if they drop off a little bit, they're still going to be in the top 15. And then I've already said on a past decree, I think Jameis Winston has the ability to be a top 8 quarterback. And I think the question mark is going to be Matt Ryan. And everyone's always waiting for him to kind of take that next step. You know, Julio is a beast. Devontae Freeman, I think he's a beast. I've also said that I think he is what it takes to be the number 1 running back overall again. And, you know, Tevin Coleman, if he's going to be healthy the entire year, if Mohamed Sanu can step up, I think Matt Ryan could at least crack the top 15 because he is a pretty accurate quarterback. He's never thrown a ton of interceptions. It's just he hasn't wowed people. So that's why I think that the 4 quarterbacks in the NFC South will all be in the top 15 at the end of the year.
I like that. That's a good King's Decree, man. So when that happens on the podcast, is there like horns and stuff go?
There are horns that I add in later.
Awesome.
So
Can't wait to hear.
I'll leave that in. I'll leave your
play the
comment
horns
about
again
that.
right now.
Yeah, I'll play it right now. And then I'll also play it after I say, and that is the King's Decree. So that wraps up the podcast. Joel, I really appreciate you recording with me. It's a lot easier having a back and forth. For the past probably 8 weeks, I've been staring at a computer screen and talking for an hour at a time, and it just goes by way quicker when I can have a back and forth with somebody.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for asking me. I'm glad it's fantasy season. It is officially fantasy season. No one should be drafting right now, but it's still fantasy season.
If you are drafting right now, there's an issue with your league, and you should request your money back. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. You can follow me, Jason Jarvi, on Twitter at Jarvi the King. Where can they follow you, Joel?
They can follow me on the Twitter also. I'm at Joel Jarvi. It's a super interesting.
I know
Twitter
you don't have a nickname, and you have a
No.
really interesting Twitter handle.
Yeah.
But that'll do it. Until next week, later, nerds.
Bye.